"What the hell do you think you're doing in my bed?" Edward Hawthorne's voice shattered the stillness like a hammer against glass. He stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, his tall frame rigid with rage, disbelief carved into every hard line of his face. Rainwater dripped from his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. All his attention was locked on the woman in his bed, Maya Williams. She shot up from the mattress, heart pounding, eyes wide not with guilt, but with shock. The twin boys, Ethan and Eli, lay curled on either side of her, finally asleep. Their faces soft, breathing deep. The teddy bear in Ethan's arms rose and fell in rhythm with his chest. "I can explain," Maya said quietly, trying not to wake the boys. Her hands lifted slightly, calm, open. They were scared. Eli started crying. Ethan got a nosebleed. Edward didn't let her finish. His palm came down fast, a sharp crack echoing off the walls as it struck her cheek. Maya staggered back, gasping, one hand flying to her face. She didn't cry out, didn't even speak. Her eyes just locked on his, stunned more by the blow than the fury. "I don't care what excuse you have," Edward growled. "You're fired. Get out of my house, now." She stood still for a moment, hand pressed to her cheek, trying to steady her breath. Her voice, when it came, was low, almost a whisper. "They begged me not to leave them. I stayed. Because they were finally calm. Finally safe. I said get out." Maya glanced down at the boys, still sleeping so deeply, so peacefully, as if the shadows that haunted them had finally lifted. She leaned over gently, kissed the top of Eli's head, then Ethan's. No words, no fanfare. And then she stepped away from the bed, shoes in hand, and walked past Edward without another word. He didn't stop her. He didn't apologize. Downstairs, Mrs. Keller turned as Maya descended the stairs. The red mark on her cheek spoke volumes. The older woman's eyes widened in shock. Maya said nothing. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Maya stepped into the gray afternoon, pulled her coat tighter, and began walking toward the gate. Back upstairs, Edward stood in the master bedroom, still breathing hard. He looked at the bed again, jaw tight. And then something registered. The quiet. He moved closer. Ethan's brow was smooth. No tossing, no whispering, no cold sweat. Eli's thumb was in his mouth, but his other hand was resting on the blanket still, relaxed. They were asleep. Not drugged, not exhausted by crying, just asleep. His throat tightened. 14 nannies, therapists, doctors. Hours of screaming fits and anxiety. And yet, Maya, this soft-spoken stranger, had managed what none of them had, and he'd struck her. He sat down on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Shame bled into his chest like ink in water. On the nightstand, a note lay folded once. He opened it. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." It wasn't signed. He read it twice, then again. His reflection in the nearby mirror looked back at him, a man hardened by grief, drowning in control, choking on silence. Down the hall, Mrs. Keller stood watching. "Sir," she said softly, "she didn't touch a thing in here, only brought them in when the little one had a nosebleed." He didn't respond. "She stayed because they asked. That's all. They didn't ask for me. They didn't ask for anyone else. Just her." Edward looked up slowly, eyes dark with something more than anger now, something closer to regret. Outside, the gate creaked closed, and for the first time in months, the Hawthorne house was silent not with grief or rage, but something else. Peace. The kind Maya had left behind. The house was too quiet. Not the comforting kind, like the hush of snowfall, or the soft turning of pages in an old book. This was the kind that felt wrong, hollow, and unfinished, like a question left unanswered. Edward Hawthorne sat alone in his study, glass of scotch untouched beside him. The note Maya had left resting on the desk like a judgment. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." He'd read it 7 times. Outside, dusk spread over the estate like a heavy quilt, and the wind pressed softly against the windows. Inside, the twins still slept, oblivious to the storm they'd just slept through, oblivious to the fact that the one person they'd allowed into their fragile world was gone. Edward leaned back in his leather chair and rubbed his temples. His hand stung faintly, the ghost of the slap he'd delivered still etched into his skin. He hadn't planned it. It wasn't who he believed he was, and yet it had happened. A moment of misjudged fury, born from grief and 1,000 quiet failures. He had hit a woman, and not just any woman. He stood suddenly and made his way upstairs. The hallway outside the boys' bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and warm cotton. A small wooden stool sat against the wall. Maya's sketchbook was on top, closed neatly, as if she'd left it there on purpose. He picked it up. Inside were simple drawings, rough, untrained, but full of heart. 2 boys holding hands beneath a tree. A tall house with too many windows. A figure sitting between the boys, arms stretched out like wings. A short caption beneath. "The one who stays." He exhaled slowly. In the nursery, Eli stirred. Edward peeked inside. The boy rolled over but didn't wake. No nightmares, no tears. He closed the door softly. Downstairs, Mrs. Keller was folding napkins when Edward entered the kitchen. She looked up and froze. Something in his expression told her to put the linen aside. "She's gone," he said simply. "I know," she replied. "I made a mistake," he said almost to himself. Mrs. Keller raised her eyebrows, but her voice stayed neutral. "You don't say." "She was in my bed." "She was in your room," Keller corrected. "Because the boys wouldn't sleep anywhere else. You weren't here." "I was. I heard them cry, beg for her." She calmed them. He pressed his lips together. "I know what you thought," she said gently. "But you weren't thinking." Silence stretched between them. He looked at the chair where Maya had sat during lunch only yesterday. It felt like weeks ago. "I need to find her," he said. Mrs. Keller didn't argue. "Start with the return address on her letter." "Georgia." He nodded, already heading toward the hall. Across town, Maya sat alone on a bench outside the train station. Her cheeks still throbbed beneath the cold. She hadn't cried. Not when he yelled, not when he hit her, not even when she walked past the front gates with nothing but her bag and the ache of unfinished work in her chest. But now, with her coat wrapped tight and her fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee, tears finally welled. She wiped them quickly. Not because she was ashamed, but because crying in public was a habit she'd spent years unlearning. A woman nearby watched her for a moment, then offered a tissue without a word. Maya smiled in thanks and looked up at the night sky. It was funny, in a cruel way. She had survived worse than a slap. She'd endured being abandoned by a foster family at age 11, losing her own son to illness, being told over and over that she was too soft to handle hard cases. But that house, those boys, they had reached something inside her she hadn't touched in years. What do you think of Maya? If you believe she's someone truly special, give her a like to show your support. And don't forget to share where you're watching this video from. Who knows, someone right near you might be watching it too. The train pulled in with a long sigh of brakes and metal. She stood slowly, not sure if she'd board. Her ticket was in her coat pocket. Destination, Savannah. But her heart was still upstairs in a white house in Greenwich, where 2 boys were finally learning to sleep. She sat back down. The next morning, Edward stood in his son's room with a tray of breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast with strawberry jam, a small bowl of cut fruit. He hadn't done this before, not once since their mother died. Eli sat up groggily. "Where's Miss Maya?" Edward hesitated. Ethan sat up too. "Is she gone?" Edward nodded. "She had to leave." "Why?" Ellie's voice cracked. "She didn't do anything bad," Ethan said, eyes narrowing. "She helped us. You saw. We were good." Edward knelt beside the bed, placing the tray on the nightstand. "It wasn't your fault. It was mine." Eli looked at him hard. "Did you yell at her?" Edward didn't lie. "Yes." "Did you hit her?" Ethan's voice was low. Edward's throat tightened. He nodded once. Both boys turned away. He stayed there, kneeling on the carpet, for a long time. "I'll fix it," he said finally. "I'll bring her back." They didn't respond, but they heard him. Later that day, Maya boarded a local bus, not a train, and headed to the nearby shelter where she used to volunteer. She needed space, perspective, somewhere to remember that the world was bigger than one house, even one that held her heart. She taught a writing class that afternoon to a group of teen girls, many of them runaways. She told them stories not about Edward or his children, but about choosing to stay when others walk away, about knowing your worth, even when others don't. When she left the shelter, there was a note stuck in the spokes of her bike. It wasn't from Edward, but it said, "They asked for you, both of them." Maya looked up at the sky, now streaked with orange, and this time, she smiled. Edward Hawthorne didn't knock. He stepped into the old community center just as the sun was beginning its descent behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the gymnasium floor. The sound of his polished shoes on linoleum was out of place here, like a cello in a punk rock band. But he didn't flinch. He scanned the room, spotting Maya at the far end, crouched beside a whiteboard, erasing crooked letters from a lesson. Around her, teenage girls gathered in a loose circle, laughing, joking, their notebooks sprawled on the floor. Maya laughed with them, her voice lighter than he remembered, not free of pain but unburdened, for a moment. He didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding his breath until she looked up and saw him. The laughter died, not because anyone told it to, but because something in Maya's posture shifted like a curtain drawn mid-performance. She stood. He walked forward, his hands empty, no briefcase, no apology letter, just the weight of what he had done. "I need to talk to you," he said. The girls looked at him warily, one of them stepping slightly in front of Maya. "It's okay," Maya said gently, and the girl relaxed. Edward glanced at the whiteboard. A single sentence had been written across the top. "Your voice has value, even when it shakes." He turned to Maya. "May I?" She nodded, leading him outside to the bench by the bus stop, the same one she'd sat on the day before, coffee in hand, tears hidden in the corners of her eyes. "I was wrong," he said immediately. "I judged you. I reacted without listening, and I put my hands on you. That's something I will regret for the rest of my life." Maya said nothing. "I saw you in my space, in my bed," he continued, "and I let fear speak louder than truth. That wasn't just unfair. It was cruel." You didn't believe me," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "Even after your sons trusted me." "I know," he said. She looked away. "You don't get to walk back into my life because you finally realized I was telling the truth." "I'm not here to clear my name," he said. "I'm here because they asked for you, not a nanny, you." Maya's eyes softened. "How are they?" "Quiet," he admitted. "Too quiet." She nodded slowly. "That's not peace. That's a wound closing over without healing." He looked down, hands clasped between his knees. "I want to fix this." "You can't fix it," she said. "But you can start with acknowledging that what your sons need isn't control, it's connection." He exhaled. "Come back." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "If I say yes, will I still be staff?" He hesitated. "Number you'll be. You'll have whatever title you want. Advisor, mentor, partner." She raised an eyebrow. "Partner?" "In their care," he clarified, though the word lingered heavier than he intended. Maya considered it. "Fine," she said, "but I have conditions." "Of course. First, no cameras in the children's rooms." He blinked. "There are none." "There were," she said. "Last month. One nanny told me." He frowned. "They were meant for safety. They teach the kids that privacy isn't theirs to keep." He nodded once. "Second," she continued, "they eat dinner at the table. With you. No phones. No business." He hesitated, but nodded again. "Third," she said, "we rewrite the house rules. Together. With them." He stared at her. "They're 5, he said. "They're people," she replied. He cracked the smallest smile. "Anything else?" She took a deep breath. "Yes. The next time you raise your hand to someone who doesn't deserve it, anyone, I'm gone. And I won't come back." His expression fell. "Understood." She stood. "I'll see them in the morning." He stood too. "Do you want a ride?" She shook her head. "I'll take the bus. I still have to finish up here." He nodded. "Maya, thank you." She paused. "Don't thank me yet. We're starting over, Mr. Hawthorne, and this time, I'm not walking on eggshells." She turned and walked back into the building, the whiteboard waiting for her return. Edward stood at the curb, watching her go. That night, he cleared the dinner table himself. He called his sons downstairs. He sat between them with a bowl of spaghetti and awkwardly tried to tell a bedtime story. getting the names wrong, the voices too stiff. They laughed at him not unkindly, just honestly. And upstairs, in their freshly made beds, Ethan whispered to Eli, "She's coming back." "How do you know?" Eli asked. "Because she said goodbye," Ethan replied, pulling the blanket over his head. "Nobody else ever does." The morning Maya returned to the Hawthorne estate, the sky was a soft wash of peach and slate blue. Birds fluttered along the treetops, and the manicured lawn glistened with dew. She stood at the iron gates a moment before they opened, gripping the straps of her worn canvas bag like armor. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The butler, Harold, greeted her with a stunned blink, then stepped aside with a slight bow. "Miss Williams," he said, with something close to reverence. "Welcome back." "Thank you," Maya replied, walking past the polished marble foyer, the towering chandelier, the silence that once felt stifling. She could hear footsteps upstairs, small, quick, and uncoordinated. Then a shout. "She's here!" Eli rounded the staircase first, arms flung open, grinning from ear to ear. Ethan followed behind, slower, but eyes bright, clutching a sketchbook. Maya knelt down just in time to catch Eli in her arms. "Well, hello," she said, laughing softly into his curls. "We made a welcome back sign," Ethan mumbled, thrusting the sketchbook at her. On the first page was a wobbly drawing of her, the two boys, and a house with a big heart over it. The caption read, "You stayed, even when you left." Maya's throat tightened. "That's beautiful, honey. Thank you." Footsteps approached behind them. Edward stood at the base of the stairs in a gray sweater, and jeans a far cry from his usual starched suits. He looked like someone trying, not someone pretending. "Breakfast is ready," he said. Maya stood, smoothing her blouse. "Good, because we have rules to rewrite." In the kitchen, the four of them gathered around the table. No phones, no staff, just a bowl of scrambled eggs, toast with honey, and fresh orange juice. "So," Maya began, pulling out a notebook, "we're going to talk about what it means to live here. Together, what's fair, what's safe, and what makes this house feel like a home." Ethan raised a hand. "Can we have music during bath time?" Maya nodded. "Reasonable," Eli added. "And no broccoli unless it's disguised." Edward coughed a laugh. "I may need clarification on that one." Maya smiled. "We'll keep a list. But this isn't just about vegetables. It's about boundaries." She looked at Edward. "For all of us." He nodded, serious now. "Understood." Over the next hour, the boys scribbled rules with crayons. Always knock, no yelling near bedtime, hugs must be asked for, pancakes on Sundays, and one story each before lights out. Maya wrote down her own. "Listen first. Apologize when you're wrong. No cameras, no exceptions." Edward added a line in neat handwriting. "Make space for forgiveness, even when it's hard." When they were done, Maya taped the paper to the refrigerator with two smiling magnets shaped like suns. "There," she said, "the new rules of the house." Later, while the boys played outside, Edward found Maya in the library sorting through children's books. "They've changed since you were gone," he said. She glanced up. Or maybe they were always capable of it, and no one gave them the space. "I've changed too," he said, more hesitant. She didn't look away. "I believe that." He stepped closer. "What you did, staying, leaving, coming back, that's more than I deserved." Maya stood, placing the last book on the shelf. "Maybe. But it's what they deserved. And I wasn't going to let your mistake be their lesson." He flinched a little, but nodded. "I want to be better." "Then start by being present, really present, not just when it's easy." He looked down, ashamed. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Maya softened. "They already have. Kids are better at that than adults. But you have to earn it, every day." That evening, Edward tucked the boys into bed for the first time since their mother died. He read from a storybook badly. Maya stood by the door, listening as the boys giggled at his mispronunciations, corrected him, and then asked for just one more page. After lights out, Edward walked Maya to the front hallway. "I was thinking," he said, "about what you said, about not being staff, about being more." She crossed her arms gently. "You're not going to offer me a promotion, are you?" He smiled faintly. "Number, I was going to offer you a voice." She tilted her head. "I want you to help me build something. Not just for them, for other kids like them. Kids who've lost something. Someone. Maya's eyes widened. You mean a foundation? He nodded. Something real. You guide it. I'll fund it. She stared at him for a long moment, then said, if we do this, it's on our terms. No media circus. No performative charity. Agreed. She extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Hawthorne. He shook it. Call me Edward. She smiled. All right. Edward. That night, as she walked to the guest room, her own space, no longer just a temporary bed, she paused outside the boys' room. From within, a whisper. She came back, Eli said. I told you, Ethan replied. And Maya, leaning gently against the doorframe, whispered back to herself, I did. 3 weeks after Maya's return, the house no longer echoed with silence but hummed with life. Breakfasts were louder, bath times messier, and the boys, once withdrawn and brittle, had begun to bloom like wildflowers freed from winter. The rules on the refrigerator were slightly worn at the edges from eager fingers pointing at them daily. And Edward, ever the stoic patriarch, found himself folding tiny socks and learning how to braid hair badly. But not everything changed at the same pace. Late one Friday night, well after the boys had fallen asleep and the staff had gone to bed, Maya wandered the halls. She often did this when the weight of memory pressed too hard against her chest. The quiet helped her think, helped her breathe. But this night, something was off. The library door was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the crack in a thin line. She pushed it open gently. Edward was there, seated at the desk, shoulders slumped forward, his phone in one hand, a half-empty glass of scotch in the other. He didn't notice her at first. Bad news? She asked softly. He flinched slightly, then glanced up. Maya, sorry, I didn't hear you. You're 3 inches from the bourbon. I figured something was wrong. He set the glass down, cleared his throat. Just reading an email. She waited. Finally, he turned the screen so she could see. The subject line read, Custody hearing. Notice of motion. Maya blinked. Custody hearing? For the boys? He nodded, jaw tight. Rebecca's parents, the Hollingsworths. They've filed for temporary guardianship, claiming I'm unfit. On what grounds? He scoffed. Bitter, neglect, emotional instability, domestic incident. Maya's face darkened. They found out about what happened. About me. Apparently, he muttered, they've been watching, waiting. Now that the boys are starting to open up, now that we've finally got some stability, they want to rip it away. She sat down across from him. Have they ever been involved in the boys' lives? Not since the funeral, he said. They blamed me for Rebecca's depression. They said I buried her too quickly, that I kept the boys from grieving properly. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Do you want me to testify? About the changes I've seen? What I've documented? Edward hesitated. I don't know if that helps, or makes things worse. They'll argue your presence proves I can't parent alone. Then maybe we don't fight them alone, she said firmly. Maybe we show them what family really looks like, what healing actually requires. His eyes met hers. You'd do that? Stand up in court? After everything? I'd do it for them, Maya said. Not for you, not for appearances. For Ethan and Eli. He exhaled, the tension in his frame releasing slightly. You really believe I can win? She stood, walked to the window, and looked out into the dark where the boys' nightlight still glowed in the distance. You won't win if you go in there as the man who slapped me. But you will if you go as the man who apologized, who changed, who showed up. He nodded slowly. Then I'll show up. The next morning, the house buzzed with quiet urgency. Maya spent time reviewing journal entries, documenting the twins' routines, emotional progress, and interactions with their father. She gathered art projects, took photos of the refrigerator rules, and printed a photo Ethan had drawn, the 4 of them beneath a rainbow, holding hands. No one told him to. He'd just drawn what felt true. Meanwhile, Edward called his lawyer and scheduled an emergency meeting. For once, his instructions weren't about reputation management or asset protection. They were about protecting 2 boys who had already lost too much. At lunch, Maya sat with the twins under the oak tree in the backyard, cutting their grilled cheese into triangles and listening as they argued about which superhero would win in a race, Flash or Sonic. Do we have to go live with Grandma and Grandpa Hollingsworth? Eli asked suddenly. his little voice barely above a whisper. Maya stilled. Why would you ask that? I heard Daddy on the phone, Ethan said. They don't like him. Maya set her plate aside. Boys, no one is taking you anywhere without a fight. And I'm not going anywhere either. But they're rich, Ethan said. And they're, white. Maya blinked, surprised. What does that have to do with anything? Ethan shrugged. They said on the phone that Daddy's made bad choices, that you're not part of the family. Maya leaned in close, cupping Eli's chin gently. Let me tell you something. Families aren't built from the same skin or last names. They're built from who stays, who fights for you when it gets hard. And I'm here. That makes me family. Eli wrapped his arms around her, small and warm. Then you better win, he mumbled. Maya looked up at the house, where Edward stood behind the window, watching them. He gave a faint nod. They were ready to fight. That night, Maya sat at her desk in the guest room, typing up her statement for court. It wasn't grand or formal. It was honest. She described the boys' anxieties when she first arrived, the screaming fits, the hollow silences, the way they reached for her hand, then let go afraid of hope, and how, over time, they started laughing again, sleeping again, trusting again. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, Healing doesn't happen in clean lines, it's messy. But in that house, I've seen two little boys begin to stitch themselves back together, not because of money, not because of blood, but because someone chose to stay. She printed it, placed it in a folder, and left it on Edward's desk. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at the note he'd once kept her handwriting, still taped to the edge of a photo frame. If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will. She smiled, because now, finally, no one was pushing away, and everyone was staying. The courthouse smelled of polished marble and nerves. Its grand columns loomed like silent judges, the morning sun pouring through tall windows and golden shafts. Maya sat beside Edward in the waiting area, both dressed in muted tones, him in a tailored gray suit, her in a soft navy dress with sleeves just long enough to cover the faint scar still healing on her wrist from a night the twins had both had nightmares. Edward glanced sideways at her. Nervous? Maya kept her gaze forward. Only about what I can't control. Across the room sat the Hollingsworths, James and Eleanor, draped in affluence like armor. Eleanor wore pearls, a neatly pressed cream skirt suit, and the kind of disapproving stare that could curdle milk. James looked less composed, his hand twitching against his cane, eyes darting toward Edward with barely concealed contempt. They hadn't acknowledged Maya, not once. The door to courtroom 5 opened, and a bailiff called them in. Maya stood, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself, This is for Ethan and Eli. Inside, the courtroom was colder than the hallway. A judge sat perched behind a tall bench, an older woman with silver hair swept into a tight bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain. Her nameplate read, Honorable Judith M. Templeton. Edward's lawyer, Mr. Fields, stood first. Calm, experienced, with just enough humanity in his tone to not sound rehearsed. He spoke of the sudden loss of Rebecca Hawthorne, of the family's struggle to rebuild in the wake of tragedy, and of Edward's recent efforts to stabilize the home, highlighting consistent therapy for the children, progress at school, and, most notably, the presence of one Maya Williams. Then, Eleanor took the stand. Her voice, though polished, trembled with indignation. We only want what's best for our grandchildren. What kind of example is a man who hires an unqualified stranger to raise his children? A man who, by his own admission, struck this woman in his own home. Maya didn't flinch, though her cheek burned at the memory. And she isn't even family, Eleanor added, her voice tightening. Judge Templeton raised an eyebrow. Miss Williams isn't on trial, Mrs. Hollingsworth, but her presence is the issue, Eleanor insisted. Edward can't care for the boys without outsourcing their emotional needs to someone else. Someone temporary, unrelated, improperly trained. She has no degrees, no license. The judge turned to Maya. Miss Williams, do you wish to respond? Maya stood and approached the bench. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need them. I don't have a degree in child psychology, she said, but I have lived through more pain than I'd wish on anyone, and I know what it looks like when children stop believing they're safe. She paused, letting her voice steady. When I arrived, Ethan and Eli didn't speak to anyone but each other. They didn't sleep.